She never inquired about how many hours I worked. She did not ask how much effort I put in. She simply glanced at my face, my age, my skin, and made up her mind that I did not belong here. She came to my house with a warning, but she never bothered to verify my documents. And when she finally did, it was already when the matter was in court. It is interesting how some people assume that youth means just renting. Have you ever heard someone claim that success depends entirely on age? Share your experience in the comments below. My name is Sarah Hamilton. I am a 23-year-old recent law school graduate working as a paralegal in real estate law. Most people think I am just another struggling young adult, but in fact, I am the granddaughter of Mayor William Hamilton, who established Oakwood Estates in 1983. The house at 1247 Maple Lane was not a purchase. It was an inheritance handed down through my grandfather's will. After finishing school and dealing with probate, I moved in only 3 months ago. Sadly, that short period was enough to catch the attention of Karen Whitmore, our HOA president for the past 3 years, known for her strict rule enforcement and love of intimidation tactics. Karen believed that someone my age had no right to own such a property. Married to a prominent bank manager, she often used her husband's influence to exert pressure on residents. From the moment I arrived, she began quietly compiling a case against me, certain that I was hiding something simply because I did not fit her vision of who should live in Oakwood Estates. The problems began small, as these situations often do. Karen always began what she called investigating me, which really meant showing up at my house almost every day. She would stand on my porch with her clipboard and a forced smile, asking invasive questions like, "When will your parents visit?" or "Does the real homeowner know you live here?" At first I tried to stay polite and explained that I was the official owner. Still, Karen would dismiss this and say, "Sweetheart, a young woman your age does not just end up with a house like this." By the second week, Karen took things further by taking photos. I would come home from work to find her in my driveway, snapping pictures of my car, mailbox, and even the garbage cans. When I confronted her, she claimed she was recording suspicious behavior for her HOA reports. She also began sending emails to the entire neighborhood about security problems and unknown residents. Although she never named me directly, everyone knew she was targeting me. In the third week, the false violations started appearing. One day I found a bright orange notice on my door accusing me of having grass taller than the allowed limit of 3 inches. When I measured, it was exactly 2.5 inches, well below the limit. When I called Karen to contest this, she insisted the measurement was official and said I owed a fine of $200. 2 days later, another notice was posted, this time accusing me of parking commercial vehicles overnight. Referring to my Honda Civic, which apparently seemed too professional for Karen's liking, the worst part was watching my neighbors begin to avoid me. Karen had been spreading rumors that I was some kind of con artist or drug dealer, explaining, "How else could someone so young afford such an expensive house?" People who used to wave when I walked my dog suddenly invented reasons to go inside whenever they saw me coming. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman living 2 houses down, actually crossed the street to avoid passing by my house during her evening walks. By the 4th week, Karen had convinced herself she was a detective. She started leaving voicemails demanding I prove my legitimate income and threatening to expose my supposed fraud to the authorities. She told me she planned to hire a private investigator to uncover the truth and that she would not rest until everything was revealed. The breaking point arrived when she called the police, accusing me of trespassing on private property and demanding they remove the squatter from my own home. Officer Martinez showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening, looking embarrassed and apologetic. "Ma'am, we received a report about possible trespassing. I understand this is likely a misunderstanding, but I am required to follow up on all complaints." Karen stood on the sidewalk behind him, arms crossed and wearing a smug smile as if she had just cracked the case. "Crime of the century, officer. This young woman has been unlawfully residing in this property for several months. I insist that you arrest her for trespassing," Karen exclaimed. I invited Officer Martinez inside and calmly presented my property deed, my driver's license, and my homeowner's insurance documents. He examined everything thoroughly while Karen remained outside, occasionally yelling through the window about counterfeit papers and complicated fraud schemes. Officer Martinez returned my documents and shook his head. "Ma'am, your paperwork is entirely valid. I am going to speak with the complainant about making false police reports." As he approached Karen, I heard him say, "Mrs. Patterson, this is the third baseless report you have submitted this month. If you keep up this harassment, you might face charges yourself." That evening, as I observed Karen storm back to her house, muttering about corrupt officers and conspiracies, I made up my mind. She wanted to uncover who I really was. She wanted to act like a detective and investigate my past. Fine. Two could play that game, and unlike Karen, I genuinely knew what I was doing. I called my father that night and explained everything. Judge Hamilton listened quietly and then said something that made me smile. "Sarah, your grandfather always said bullies understand only one language. Maybe it is time this woman learned some new vocabulary." The next morning I began my own probe, thanks to my legal expertise. Through my training and my grandfather's history, I gained access to the HOA records dating back to the neighborhood's establishment. What I uncovered was both astonishing and incriminating. Karen had been abusing her role as HOA president by selectively applying rules against neighbors she disliked while ignoring the same breaches committed by her friends and supporters. She altered HOA regulations without following proper voting processes, used community funds for her personal legal matters, and even created fabricated rules to justify her harassment efforts. I also found that Karen's own property had several violations she conveniently overlooked. Her fence was 6 inches taller than allowed. She parked her husband's work van overnight, despite restrictions on commercial vehicles, and she kept 4 dogs, twice the number permitted by the HOA. The most revealing evidence showed that Karen had spent over $3,000 of HOA money on a lawyer she described as investigating property fraud, which was essentially funding someone to help her target me. My breakthrough occurred when I reached out to Mrs. Patterson, a 75-year-old resident who had lived in the neighborhood since my grandfather's era. Introducing myself as William Hamilton's granddaughter instantly changed her attitude. She exclaimed, "Oh, my goodness, you're Bill's granddaughter. He was the finest man who ever lived in this neighborhood. He would be so proud to see you carrying on his legacy." Mrs. Patterson then shared many stories that helped me understand the community's history better. I heard all those tales about how Karen had tried to get her evicted for owning too many cats, even though she only had a single one. There were stories about false complaints and intimidation techniques, plus neighbors who had been pushed out because of Karen's constant harassment. But Mrs. Patterson also gave me something more. Supporters who had quietly been recording Karen's behavior for years, waiting for someone who could actually take action. She introduced me to Mr. Rodriguez, the neighborhood handyman who had seen Karen ruining my flower beds while I was at work. She also put me in touch with Sarah, a single mother who was too scared to speak up when Karen targeted her over inappropriate lawn decorations. One by one, I started to assemble a group of neighbors who had all suffered under Karen's abuse of authority. The final part of my plan involved something Karen never saw coming. I contacted the county HOA Oversight Board. It turned out that Oakwood Estates was still working under old bylaws that gave Karen way more power than she legally should have. The Oversight Board was eager to hear about illegal rule changes, misuse of community funds, and the ongoing harassment of residents. They set a formal review for the next month's HOA meeting, a meeting in which Karen would have to explain every choice she had made as president. Normally, only around 15 people from 50 households showed up to the monthly HOA meeting, but this time was different. 42 people gathered as Karen entered the community center's conference room, expecting her usual crowd of board members, retirees, and a handful of concerned parents. Instead, she was met with nearly the whole neighborhood, including several faces she likely had not seen at a meeting for many years. She appeared both puzzled and pleased, assuming that people were finally taking community leadership seriously. "Good evening, everyone," Karen began, settling into her familiar seat at the head table. "I am thrilled to see such involvement from our community. As you are aware, we have some urgent security issues to discuss tonight." She pulled out a thick folder and smiled toward me. "I have been conducting a detailed investigation into fraudulent property ownership in our neighborhood, and I believe it is our duty to protect our community from criminal elements." I sat quietly in the back row, dressed in my best professional clothes and holding a briefcase that had once belonged to my grandfather. Karen spent 20 minutes laying out her case against me, presenting photos of my car, copies of my property deed, which she claimed were fake, and a comprehensive timeline of my suspicious activities. These supposedly included everyday things like receiving mail and maintaining the yard. She ended her presentation by demanding that the HOA contact law enforcement and begin procedures to remove this individual from our community. The room fell silent once Karen finished speaking, then Mrs. Patterson. She rose slowly, leaning on her cane for support. "Karen, dear, I believe it is time for you to understand something about the young woman you've been troubling. Sarah, could you please step forward?" I walked to the front of the room, opened my briefcase, and took out a framed photograph dated 1983. It showed the groundbreaking ceremony for Oakwood Estates, with my grandfather cutting the ribbon while the mayor and city council members looked on. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice resonating clearly through the suddenly attentive crowd, "I would like to introduce you to my grandfather, William Hamilton. He is the man who bought this land, designed this neighborhood, and founded the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, with the clear intention of safeguarding residents' rights, not infringing upon them." I met Karen's gaze, noticing how her face had turned completely pale. "My name is Sarah Hamilton. I graduated from Northwestern Law School 3 months ago. The house at 1247 Maple Lane has belonged to my family since this neighborhood was first established. I placed my grandfather's original property deed on the table, the master deed covering the entire development. This document proves that my grandfather not only owned my current home, but actually held ownership of all the land that became Oakwood Estates. He sold individual plots to families wishing to build their dream houses and maintained meticulous records of every sale to ensure this community would flourish for many generations. Then I pulled out a thick folder full of documents that supported this history. Those documents, along with my grandfather's will, the probate court's decision, and my fully legitimate ownership papers, are all here. But my presentation was not over yet. "Mrs. Patterson, you requested an investigation, so I undertook one. What I uncovered was 3 years of systematic abuse of your role as HOA president." I opened my laptop and linked it to the room's projector. "These are recordings of our conversations, including your threats and demands for information that you had no legal right to request. Here are photos showing damage you caused to my flower beds while I was at work. And here are financial records revealing that you spent $3,200 from community funds to hire a lawyer to harass me." The room buzzed with angry whispers as Karen tried to speak, but I pressed on. "More importantly, these are proof of violations on your own property that you have ignored, while making up infractions against me and other residents. The projector displayed clear images of Karen's oversized fence, her husband's commercial vehicle, and her 4 dogs playing in a yard designed for only 2 pets, according to HOA rules. Mrs. Thompson stood up once more. I want everyone to understand that Sarah is not the first victim Karen has targeted in the last 3 years. She has harassed 17 different households with false violations, unlawful fines, and intimidation. Some of our neighbors have actually moved away rather than endure her behavior. Other residents who had suffered abuse started speaking out, sharing their own experiences of Karen's harassment. The momentum had shifted completely when Mr. Rodriguez raised his hand and said he had a video showing Karen destroying Sarah's flowers and then confronting her the following day over supposed poor landscaping. Linda Park then stood up with tears in her eyes, revealing that Karen had tried to remove her children's sandbox under the pretense it was a safety risk, when in fact she simply disliked kids playing outside her window. One after another, Karen's victims found the courage to speak up. Desperate to regain control, Karen exclaimed that this was absurd, reminding everyone she was the president of the association with the authority to investigate suspicious activity and uphold community rules. Pointing at me, she accused me of deceiving them all, claiming she recognized fraud and that someone my age could not simply inherit a house valued at $800,000. I responded calmly with a smile, producing one final document. I confirmed that it was unusual for someone my age to inherit such valuable property, but informed them that my father was Judge Robert Hamilton of the County Superior Court, who was deeply concerned about the harassment his daughter was enduring. Karen's face drained of color as I added that he was especially interested in her misuse of HOA funds for personal legal fees, which amounted to embezzlement of community assets. The room sank into silence. Once again, but this time the silence felt different, filled with a sense of expectation rather than confusion. I went on. The County HOA Oversight Board has also been investigating your conduct as president. They discovered several breaches of state laws related to homeowner associations, including unauthorized changes to rules, selective application of regulations, and failure to keep proper financial records. They will present their conclusions to the district attorney next week. Mrs. Patterson then called for an immediate vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. All those in favor of removing Karen Whitmore as the president of the Oakwood Estates HOA raised their hands, 41 in total. Karen looked around the room, stunned, finally understanding that her era of control had ended. "This is not legal. You cannot just vote me out. I know my rights," she protested, but Officer Martinez was already gathering signatures on a petition to officially end Karen's presidency and initiate a new election. The meeting concluded with Karen storming out, yelling about lawyers, lawsuits, and how everyone would regret their decision, yet her threats now felt empty since the truth was known. As residents left the community center, many stopped to shake my hand and apologize for having believed Karen's lies. "Your grandfather would be so proud," Mrs. Patterson whispered as she hugged me. "He always said this neighborhood would be looked after by those who truly cared about justice." Within a week, Karen and her husband had... The harassment ceased instantly once their house was put up for sale, as did the false violation notices that had been troubling half the neighborhood. The for sale sign placed in front of their home became a symbol of triumph for everyone who had endured Karen's oppression. They set the price 15% below the market value, eager to sell quickly and leave the community that had turned against them. I was chosen without opposition as the new HOA president, despite my initial objections that I was too young and lacked experience. During my swearing in, Sarah, Mrs. Patterson, said, "Your grandfather created this community on the foundations of fairness and respect. You have already shown that you will fight to uphold those values just as he did." My first official move was to establish a grievance committee to carefully examine all fines and violations to confirm their legitimacy and fairness. We also introduced new measures for financial transparency, demanding monthly reports on HOA spending as well as community approval for any legal fees. The $3,000 Karen had spent harassing me was recovered through the sale of her property, and we invested that money to install new playground facilities that neighborhood children had been asking for many years. Karen's reign of fear and intimidation was gradually being replaced by genuine improvements in the community. The most rewarding transformation was seeing my neighbors reconnect with one another once more, beginning to talk and organize together again. Block parties and neighborhood barbecues returned. Children played freely outside without fear of noise complaints, and neighbors felt comfortable decorating their homes for holidays without the stress of false allegations. Mrs. Patterson, who had avoided me for many months, became one of my most loyal supporters and began bringing me homemade cookies every Sunday. Half a year after Karen left, we organized the first annual William Hamilton Community Day, which included a dedication ceremony for the new playground and a historical exhibit showcasing my grandfather's vision for Oakwood Estates. My father, Judge Hamilton, attended as the guest of honor, sending a strong message to anyone who might think of repeating Karen's behavior. This community was protected. Perhaps the most rewarding result was personal. Daniel Rodriguez, whose father worked as a landscape architect, helped design the new community garden we created in the vacant lot at the end of Maple Lane. During that project, we realized we shared much more than just enduring Karen's harassment. Our first date was a picnic in the garden we had built together, and 6 months later, he proposed right there among the roses my grandfather planted 4 decades ago. 2 years on, I stood in my front yard watering the same rose bushes that had sparked this entire journey. My wedding ring caught the sunlight as I adjusted the hose, and I couldn't help but smile, reflecting on how much had changed. My life had changed when Daniel and I purchased the house next door after old Mr. Peterson relocated to Florida. We were preparing to start a family in the neighborhood where my grandfather's legacy still lived on. The community had flourished under fresh guidance. Property values had actually gone up after Karen moved away. As news spread about Oakwood Estates being a truly inviting place to live, we introduced programs for newcomers, such as welcome committees and mentorship initiatives that assisted people in settling into the community without facing hostility or doubt. The difference compared to Karen's time in charge was striking. I had also launched my own law firm, focusing on homeowner association disputes and property rights. Word got around about the young attorney who defeated an oppressive HOA president. I found myself defending residents from neighborhoods nationwide confronting their own Karens. Each matter reminded me how crucial it was to confront bullies, no matter what authority they claimed to hold. Mrs. Patterson, now 87 and still sharp as ever, had become like a grandmother to me. She often shared with visitors the tale of how little Sarah Hamilton saved our neighborhood from that awful woman. She never grew tired of explaining that my grandfather would have handled the situation just the same. "Your grandfather always said," she would add, "that true leadership is not about wielding power over others." People would often remind me that it is about using whatever influence you have to defend those who cannot protect themselves. The final confirmation arrived when the county district attorney officially charged Karen with embezzlement and harassment. She eventually admitted guilt for misappropriating community funds and received a sentence of community service along with restitution payments. The legal case attracted local media attention, turning into a warning story about the consequences when minor despots abuse their power. Karen had attempted to ruin my life because she could not accept that someone my age deserved the success I had achieved. Instead, she ended up ruining her own life and losing everything she fought so hard to keep. As I finished watering my roses and glanced around the flourishing neighborhood my grandfather had created, I felt a profound appreciation for the lesson Karen had unintentionally given me. She demonstrated that standing up to bullies is not merely about defending oneself, but about safeguarding everyone who comes after. Every individual moving into Oakwood Estates now understands they will be greeted with kindness and support rather than fear and intimidation. That is a heritage worth defending, and one my grandfather would without doubt endorse. Sometimes the greatest revenge is truly living well, building something stronger, and proving that the tactics of bullies do not work against people who understand their value and refuse to retreat from confrontation. How ironic